Here we go, folks. Gave you an extra 2 minutes. Okay. The May 17th, 2023 meeting of the Special Joint City Council Redevelopment Agency budgets called to order. This meeting has been properly noticed and posted in compliance with the open meeting law. These proceedings are being video recorded as well as presented live on KCLV Cable Channel 2. You may also watch the meeting live on Apple TV, Roku, Amazon Fire TV, on the Go Vegas app. City Council meeting, as well as all other KCLV programming, may be viewed on the internet at www.kclv.tv/live. The proceedings will be rebroadcast on KCLV Channel 2 and the web the Wednesday of the meeting at 8 p.m., also Friday 4 a.m., Saturday 7 p.m., Sunday 7 a.m., following Monday at 5 p.m. For public comment related items on the agenda, citizen participation, public hearing items, we have available a speaker card which you may complete and submit to the city clerk up front. Cards are available in the clerk's office or at the rear of these chambers. If you do not submit a card, however, it does not prevent you from speaking under public comment, citizen participation, or specified public hearing items. If anyone's present today who has need for hearing impaired equipment, please see our city clerk staff up front. And if you park in the parking garage across the street, a self-validation machine is located in the foyer between council chambers and the security desk you walk through to enter our chambers. You must have your ticket with you to use the machine. However, if you do not have your ticket, please see security personnel when exiting for a validation coupon. Okay, agenda item 3. Public comment during this portion of the agenda must be limited to matters on the agenda for action. The amount of time any single speaker is allowed may be limited. All comments made will be cross-referenced to those specific items. If anyone submitted a speaker card wishes to speak under this portion of the agenda, please come to the podium, state your name for the record. This is your opportunity to address Council and Redevelopment Agency, but Council and Redevelopment Agency are not able to respond or engage in dialogue. We will set the time at 1 moment. We will say it at 1 moment or 1 minute. So, seeing no one, thank you very much. We will now hear items 4 and 5 together, which are both public hearings. Item 4 is public hearing and discussion for possible action regarding fiscal year 2024 City of Las Vegas, tentative budget, fiscal year 2024 City of Las Vegas final budget, including the 5-year capital improvement plan for all wards. Item 5 is public hearing and discussion for possible action regarding fiscal year 2024 City of Las Vegas Redevelopment Agency tentative budget and fiscal year 2024 City of Las Vegas Redevelopment Agency final budget. Redevelopment areas, wards 1, 3, and 5, Councilman Knutson and Creer and Councilwoman Diaz. And so here we go, Mr. Amesley, Ms. Helmsley, and Mr. Cervantes. Who start?
I'll start off. Good afternoon, Mayor, Council. Jorge Cervantes, City Manager for the record, and with me I have
Gary Ameling, Chief Financial Officer.
Susan Helmsley, Finance Director.
And Mike Jansen, Executive Director.
We're here today, Mayor and Council, to propose to you the final budget for the City of Las Vegas. On April 5th, we brought forward to you the tentative budget for the year. Since then, we've added some additional items based on feedback we got from Council and from some of the departments. And so today we'll highlight what some of those items are. But before we do that, I just want to acknowledge that this budget really is trying to address the priorities that Council set forth before staff, and that was to focus on public safety, diversifying the economy, and healthcare. And so you'll see from these bullet points some of the items that we're doing there on the public safety side. What we're finding is a higher level of attrition through fire as some of our folks are getting to the age of the retirement or the service. And so because of that, we're adding an additional academy to try to keep up, make sure that we keep our forces at the level they need to be. Also a big focus on mental and health and wellness. Our public safety departments already have some role in that, but we're expanding that capacity for those folks there. On the diversifying the economy, we continue with the America Rescue Plan. As we're monitoring the funds that were allocated to the city and that we in turn put out to the community. We're making sure that those are being spent in the proper manner, and we anticipate that some of those funds may come back, so we're putting together a list of folks that need additional revenue or other folks that have needs, so as the money does come back, we can get it back out to the community. And on the healthcare side, we're completing the Homeless Resource Center, what we call the courtyard, and we're also getting ready to finish up a wellness center, and we've got 2 that are on the book. So the team today is going to go into a little more detail on what those changes were between tentative and final, and so I'll turn it over to Mr. Amlin.
Thank you, Jorge, and good afternoon. Before we get started, just wanted to give a quick shout out to everybody that helped us with the budget process this year. The budget process is a very, very lengthy process. It kicks off in the fall and runs through the end of the spring, and so it's about a 6-month process, and so we're very grateful for everybody's assistance on helping us put together the budget. We're going to cover some of the highlights, and I'll try to point out some of the things that have changed from the presentation that we made last month. The first slide looks at the current fiscal year that we're winding up in the next month or so. Looking first at the revenue side, revenues are now expected to exceed budget by about $86.2 million. The primary driver behind that is the collections of what we call consolidated tax, or C-tax, which is expected to be about $37.5 million ahead of budget. That's up about $5 million from what we showed you when we presented the tentative budget last month. On the expenditure side, the budget is also going to be over budget, but that's really a good news story this year. The majority of the amount that's over budget is primarily due to the American Rescue Act money that's coming into the general fund and then flowing back out to the capital program, or being spent directly by departments in the general fund. In addition to that, we also see some under expenditure on our salary and benefits costs, which is always a good thing, as well as being able to transfer monies to capital projects, and Mike's going to go through the capital budget a little bit later in the presentation. Looking now at fiscal year 2024, the proposed budget for the general fund. On the revenue side, the projection is that we'll see about a 3.2% growth in revenues as compared to our year-end estimates for the current fiscal year. Consolidated tax, which is our largest revenue source, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail in a moment, is up about $5 million from our year-end projection from last year. We're trying to be conservative there, though, because we do anticipate at some point that the economy will slow down, and so our estimate is below the estimate that the state has given us as their projection for the city of Las Vegas by about $11.6 million. On the property tax side, we've seen some growth in property taxes over the last several years as assessed valuations have grown, and we are subject to some caps, however. The caps are 3% for residential and 8% for non-residential. The money that is not collected as part of the property tax but is assessed goes into what's called abated tax, and you'll see that on the property tax slide in just a moment. The other revenue sources didn't see much change from what we presented to you last month. The main driver behind why revenues will be down next year as compared to this year is because we don't have those American Rescue Act monies flowing through the general fund. So we'll see a decrease in the transfers out of the general fund next fiscal year. Looking at how the revenue sources come into the city, this pie chart shows you that by far the consolidated tax along the right side in blue is our largest revenue source, making up a little bit more than half of the general fund revenues, with property tax in the orange along the bottom left-hand side making up about 20%, and in total about 3/4 of our general fund revenues come from those 2 revenue sources, so we're very dependent on them, and it's because they are somewhat sensitive to economic cycles, we always keep a close eye on them to make sure that they're performing as expected, and we also have adequate reserves in place in case those revenues do start to come up with shortfalls. Looking at consolidated tax in a little bit more of a historical look, this bar chart shows you the last 15 years or so of collections. Prior to the Great Recession, which would have been just to the left of the left bar on this chart, we actually saw a peak in collections of $264 million, and then due to the effects of the Great Recession, consolidated taxes declined for 4 years in a row. So I just wanted to point that out, that is a concern moving forward, that when we do have a recession, which some economists are predicting we might have next year, that the consolidated taxes could decline, and so that's one of the reasons why we have a 25% reserve target in the general fund to make sure that we have adequate money in the bank should those revenues decline. We did get back to where we were about 10 years later in fiscal year 2016, and then we've seen pretty steady growth with exception of the first year of the pandemic when actual C-tax collections declined. Helpful to our economy was the stimulus monies that flowed in from the federal government that helped us work our way through the pandemic, and we've seen now 3 years in a row of pretty good growth in C-tax collections. And then you can see the bar on the right is our projection for next fiscal year at $430 million. Again, that's below the state's estimate, which was $441 million. Looking at property taxes, which are about 20% of general fund revenues, again, this is a historical chart. The effects of the Great Recession can also be seen in property tax collections, as property tax collections declined pretty significantly and then took about 13 years to get back to where they were before, just passing the previous high this current fiscal year. Again, one of our larger revenue sources, we're expecting to collect about $150.6 million in the general fund next fiscal year, which is an increase of about 7.7% over the current year. And with that, I'm going to turn the next section over to Susan Heltzley, our Finance Director.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Council, and I'm Susan Heltzley, for the record, Director of Finance. Before I get into the rest of the presentation, I just want to thank my budget team. They react very quickly to any changes that happen between tentative and final. So a big shout out to Gail Likos and Quinn Okakieski and Paul Bresnahan, Eric Wynn, Therese Alvarez, and Christian Montenegro, and I'm sure I've forgotten some, so all of the finance team really helps out quite a bit. So I get to talk about the expenditure highlights, so that's the fun part, right? So just to remind everybody, Metro requested an increase of 10.5%, which was 23 additional civilian positions, some additional commission positions. Half of those new positions are going to the new Employee Health, Wellness, and Safety Bureau, and then the remaining increase was due to COLAs, increased workers' comp, and increased PERS contributions. We're also adding that third fire academy and some dedicated fire training officers, expansion of the call reduction initiative and the crisis response team, additional animal protection officers. It shores up the citywide support services with additional positions, and it also, come back here, there it goes. Oop. There we go, I jumped ahead. Shores up the citywide support services and addresses neighborhood needs with additional positions for neighborhood beautification, housing rehabilitation, and code enforcement programs. Also adding some City Hall security technology. It responds to inflationary cost increases on utilities and services and supplies. It includes funding for the Nevada Public Employee Retirement System employer rate increases, which go into effect in July. And it also includes all of our collective bargaining agreements. The PPA and POA is valid through 6/30/25. The IAFF and CEA are valid through 6/30/24. And the POSA is open for FY24, which includes, I believe, four people. So it's a very small union. So moving on, what changed between tentative and final? I'm happy to say we did not have a lot of changes this year. We did remove one position. It was an IT position for fire and rescue in the communications center. After discussion with both the fire department and IT, it was determined this position was not needed. So we had 69.88 positions in the tentative budget. It's now 68.88. So only one position changed this time. Moving on to what changed between tentative and final on the expense side, we did update the revenue forecast based on our most recent trends and economic indicators, and we did add about $5 million to consolidated tax and made a few adjustments to some of the other items. We reevaluated salary and benefits on our most recent staffing changes, including COLA, step, and merit increases. That added about $1 million between tentative and final. We also adjusted the Metro contract to final budget request, so we saved a whole $6,085. So that was very nice of them to give us back that $6,000. We also added $3.3 million in neighborhood services for the recuperative care center operations. This was something that was actually it was put in as an expanded request before tentative. We believed we could fund that $3.3 million through a variety of other sources, but as we started moving into final, we decided to go ahead and put it into the general fund, just in case those sources don't come through in FY24, and that way we have expenditure authority for our recuperative care center. And we are seeking Medicaid reimbursement for that, but as I think we've just been discussing, we won't get those provider codes until sometimes in 24. We've also added $50,000 to YDSI for a new school partnership, and we're adding $75,000 to YDSI for ongoing operations of the urban agriculture hydroponic farms, so we can continue to grow all those wonderful leafy vegetables in Ward 5. We're adding $20,000 in neighborhood services for the Neighborhood Partners Fund, And moving on out of the general fund to some of our other funds, we've added $400,000 to the facilities internal service fund to accommodate the higher than expected escalation of natural gas utility costs. And we're increasing spending authority in the multi-purpose special revenue fund by $5 million for a contribution to the Smith Center of anticipated excess car rental tax revenues. We're also increasing the spending authority in the multi-purpose special revenue fund by $2.5 million to provide for additional opioid settlement relief funds. We're also increasing the spending authority in the Special Improvement District Special Revenue Fund by $650,000 to provide refunding of residual funds. And we're increasing the spending authority in the Neighborhood Beautification Special Revenue Fund by $100,000. So when we say we're increasing we have to have spending authority in order to spend either excess revenue or fund balance, and that's what the majority of these changes are. As we were going through from tentative to final, we realized we need to make a few technical adjustments. We're also adding $2 million in an RDA contribution for the Civic Plaza Building Number 2 tenant improvements. And we're adding $30 million in bonding authority, which will be backed by the 1% transportation room tax allocation to provide for matching dollars for federal transportation grants. And I believe Mike will be discussing that further when we get to CIP. And as a final thing, we added an additional $9 million transfer of fund balance above reserve requirements in fiscal year 23 that went from general fund to the CIP, and also included a $90,000 transfer to the Percent for Arts Special Revenue Fund. So here we see the bar chart, or I'm sorry, this is a pie chart, on all of our general fund expenditures. So we'll have $754.4 million in general fund expenses next year. Salary and benefits make up 49.5%. Of course, that's our biggest category. Our contribution to Metro is 22.5%. Our non-labor is 20.2%. Other is 4.8%, and debt service is 3%. And here we have it expressed by function, so we can see how do we spend our $754.4 million by the function within the city. Public safety is our biggest expense at 63%, followed by general government at 10.5%. Other is 9%. That's most of those are our transfers. Culture and Rec is 8.3%, Public Works is 1.6%, debt service is 3%, and judicial is 4.6%. So here are the final numbers for our general fund budget. So for our FY23 estimate, we're estimating we're going to end up with an excess of $4.3 million, putting our unrestricted fund balance right at 25%. And moving into FY24, we'll have revenues of $763.2, our expenses of $754.4, for an excess of $8.8 million. And our unrestricted fund balance will be 27.2%. And here, going forward, you can see our general fund forecast. And because we increased our revenue forecast for this year, you'll see that we don't fall into the red until FY29. And again, we generally forecast our revenues very conservatively, about 2%, and then our expenses grow about 3%. So at some point, they actually go red down the line. But for FY24, we have our $8.8 million surplus, 28.3 in 25, 21 in 26, 10.9 in 27. FY28, we're forecast to break pretty much even. And in FY29, you'll see where we're estimating a deficit of 10.2 million. But of course, a lot can change between now and FY29. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike Jansen.
Thank you very much, Susan. Good afternoon, Council. Mike Jansen, Executive Director. So on the capital slides, I'm going to start off really saying that the capital program really starts after today, because the pressure goes from planning for this capital improvement plan to actually working to deliver all the projects that are in this plan. And I will tell you, I have an army of staff that are so committed to delivering capital projects. If I mentioned one name, I would leave some out. So I'm going to simply say my team is ready and excited about this capital improvement program program to deliver all the ones that we've worked on closely with you and your staff and with all the department directors that are in the audience today. So this first slide really, I highlighted in red the only changes from the tentative plan, and what you see here is Gary alluded to, Susan alluded to, the redevelopment agency contribution. This slide captures all of the sources of funds that we use to deliver the capital program, and we didn't previously have a contribution from the RDA. As you know, we've been working closely to deliver select tenants into that Building 2 in Civic Plaza. That one was reserved not for city staff, but for select tenants that are going to add a lot of good elements to our overall City Hall campus. So in return for trying to lure someone with a long-term lease, a 10-year lease, let's say, we're building that today as a shell. This $2 million will go towards those tenants so that we can contribute towards those tenant improvements at the front end, but in return get a real nice long-term leases. That's our goal. So that's what that ad is for the RDA. And then Susan mentioned the road construction bond, federal infrastructure match. On an upcoming slide, I'm going to get into that a little bit more to explain the reasoning behind that. But what I'll say on this slide, that item is a strategic placeholder, and I'll explain to you why. On this slide, really no major changes. These are the major projects. They continue to be the major projects. We had a minor rounding error, if you will, from the Lorenzi Park improvements. These are federal grants we got from Southern Nevada Public Land Management Act, and the actual contract amount that we're getting is $3.2 million. We had it previously $3.3, so we wanted to make sure we were showing it accurately to match the actual funding agreement that we're going to be entering with Southern Nevada Public Land Management Act. The rest of the major projects are all the same ones. So this slide here captures sort of the crux of the changes on the capital side, and you'll see there at the top the additional $30 million bond for federal infrastructure bill grant match. What is behind that strategy to leverage our restricted funds? We have funds that we collect, 1% transportation room tax, that are restricted, can only be used for transportation improvements. And what's going on the outside is there are hundreds of millions, probably billions of federal infrastructure dollars that will continue to drop through fiscal year 24. And in order to compete for those funds, they are not discretionary, they are competitive. When you submit for a grant, you have to submit a matching component, somewhere between 5 and 50%. And so this strategy is we have a resource, the 1% transportation tax, that can only be used for transportation improvements. And if we can leverage those dollars and potentially double or triple or quadruple them by securing some additional federal grants, we think that's a good thing. What I will point out here is our first source for matching funds on all of our federal projects that I often bring to you during our council briefings is the RTC. The challenge that we have is with all the projects that we have underway throughout the city, there may or may not be sufficient additional revenues to pledge towards some of these upcoming grants. So this is a placeholder. Our first choice when we apply for a grant will be to go towards the RTC, but if there is a limitation or a restriction, we would have this option in place. As you saw earlier this year when we went through the bond process for Civic Plaza, it's a multi-step process, so really this is giving us the authority to have this in place as a placeholder, but if we actually see a grant that makes sense, we would be bringing that information to you, and then if there was support for it, then we would walk through the bond process. So I wanted to give you that background on what that looks like. Some questions we had is what does the revenues look like for this program? I asked Susan and her team to take a look at the generation of this program, and over the FY 25 to 34 period, that would be the 10-year period where the bonds would be backed by. They estimate that program brings in about $4.5 million a year. So again, that would be $45 million towards what we're looking at is maybe a $30 million bond. So again, it's a strategic move. Next one down is on the transfer that was mentioned going towards a couple other capital projects. During the tentative budget to now, we had a lot of discussion with council on our efforts to make some adaptation to our playground equipment throughout all of our parks, the inclusive adaptive playground equipment. In tentative budget, we had $1 million programmed towards doing this work, and that would only go so far. And the ask was, can we do a little bit more, Mike? So we moved that from $1 million to $2 million, and that'll allow us to do many parks in every ward to incorporate these playground upgrades. We also have so much going on right now in the Arts District. Between the public and private investment, drive through any of the areas down there and you will see a lot of things going on. And so with all the things that are going on in the Arts District, with our parking garage that we're working on, with our infrastructure projects, with the private developer projects, we said it's really we need to do a little bit more Arts District master planning. It's part of the overall downtown master plan, but let's get in there a little bit closer, working with all the business owners and residents to make sure we got everything right. And so the idea behind this is to be able to bring everything together and do a little bit more master plan work on the Arts District and work on other things we need to implement. So that wasn't previously one of the projects on the tentative, but again, with all the activity going on in there, working closely with you, Councilwoman, let's bring everyone together. So that was the idea behind here, to do a little allocation. Then last but not least, the bid reserve. And the bid reserve is really an important part of our CIP plan because we have dozens of projects that are going to bid this fiscal year. Some are small, some are medium, and some are bigger. And just a very, very quick snapshot for the ones that stand out for me. In Ward 1 is the Cragen Park improvements will be going to bid. In Ward 2 will be the Regional Aquatic Complex improvements. Ward 3 will be the Fire Training Center rehab that we talked quite a bit about, Councilwoman Diaz. Ward 4 is the Durango Hills Pool rehab. Ward 5 is the CSN Westside Training Center. And Ward 6, the Centennial Hills Indoor-Outdoor Pool rehab. Those are some bigger projects. They're all going to bid this year, and there's still a lot of volatility in the market. Contractors still have some reservations on what the inflationary pressure may do on materials, on labor, on things of that nature. So the bid reserve is what we go to when we open bids. If the number is coming high, we have an ability to supplement the dollars to get those projects out the door. And so again, just a snapshot of some of the bigger ones in your wards, but no doubt there's dozens going to bid. Things like HVAC systems, roofs, boilers, all those types of projects. So again, that bid reserve allocation is really going to be helpful. So really on this last slide, the changes are just to match everything that we've talked about. The total allocation for this year's CIP program is $190 million. And just as a comparison, our CIP plan last year was $274 million. So it's a smaller, $297 million. So it's a smaller budget, but that's really because last year we had a very large bond allocation towards the Civic Plaza project. Again, this capital plan does not reflect the RTC projects, the NDOT projects, the regional flood projects. It's really those other projects that it's capturing. And the last part of this slide is just truing up the numbers for each category based on the changes from tentative to final. And at the end of the day, it's 59 new projects, dozens of other existing projects that are in various stages of design. But I think at the end of the day, really great investment citywide, literally to every corner of the city is going to see this capital dollar investment. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Gary. All right.
Oops, I just hit the wrong button. Sorry.
Okay, the next section, actually, we're going to switch gears a little bit, and this is related to agenda item number 5 on your agenda, and talk about the redevelopment agency budget. There's really not much that's changed in the redevelopment agency budget other than the additional contribution to the CIP that Mike mentioned. And so the third up from the bottom bullet here is the contribution of the $2 million to the Civic Plaza Building Number 2 tenant improvement project. On the next slide, you'll see that money flow out of the RDA to the CIP in the second line up from the expenditure total there, the $2 million, as compared to the previous year when there was a contribution towards the Arts District parking garage from the RDA to the capital program. And those are really the only 2 changes in the RDA budget. We also talked at the tentative budget time about desire to make some updates to the redevelopment agency's budget policies. And in your packet today, under agenda item number 6, were those policies spelled out both in a clean version and a red line version. Just in terms of to highlight what the changes were all about, this is the first recommended update to these policies since 2014. We revised the language primarily to match up with the language in the budget policies for the city that we had you adopt last year. So pretty much they bring those 2 into alignment. And then we adjusted the reserve target for the RDA from 5%, which was in your existing policy, up to a 10% reserve target, which we felt was a little bit more prudent for the redevelopment agency. So that's the redevelopment agency budget, and looking now at the total city budget for all funds. Again, not much has changed in most of these categories of fund types. The general fund budget, as Susan showed you, is proposed at $754.4 million. There was a little bit of an increase in the special revenue fund budgets, totaling now $219.2 million. The capital program number on this slide does include all of those outside funding sources that Mike mentioned were not included in his numbers on his slides. And so our total budget proposal for next year is $2.2 billion, and you can see how that plays out into the various types of fund categories. Along the bottom of the slide, you can see the proposed changes in the FTE staffing levels. Again, as Susan pointed out, this is an overall increase from last fiscal year of 68.88 FTEs. Bringing it now to a conclusion, the key budget takeaways for this year, we believe that this budget responds to your council priorities of public safety, healthcare, and diversifying the economy. We are focusing on organizational and fiscal health, trying to be conservative, given that we think the economy may slow down moving forward. And then, as Susan pointed out, this is a surplus budget that we'd be filing with the state for the general fund of $8.8 million, which is up from a $2.5 million surplus budget in the tentative budget. The actions that we're requesting once you close the public hearing, Mayor, is to approve the city's final budget for fiscal year 2024. That's agenda item number 4 on your agenda. Approve the redevelopment agency's final budget for fiscal year 2024. That's agenda item number 5. And then lastly, to approve the resolution revising the redevelopment agency's budget policies, which is agenda item number 6. The only other steps that would take place after today, we are required by state law to file this final budget with the state by June 1st, and then to file the final CIP budget with the state, at the 5-year CIP budget with the state by August 1st. And with that, we're happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Well, I'm going to turn that back to council to see, and of course to public comment here. But again, I always go back to what it's been like for these past 12 years with the priorities of public safety, health, and diversifying the economy. I think that's been holding for 25 years, actually. And so with the concentration and knowing the work your teams, all of your teams have been doing, it's really remarkable because we've seen such improvement and we've seen attitudinal improvement too. So it is, this is quite an undertaking. And so first, if there are any comments before we move to a motion on 4 and 5. Yes, Councilwoman Bruni, please.
Thank you, Mayor. As a relative and newbie, I just wanted to say I am so impressed with the process and the level of transparency and dialogue around different ideas or priorities. So thank you. And I also want to go on record saying I really appreciate your attention to the organizational health and finding ways to move any extra revenue over to our reserves. So thank you for that. It's a budget that is easy to say yes to and also represent publicly because I think it aligns very intentionally with our priorities. So thank you. I do have one small question. Susan, when you had the expenditures by function, you had public safety, government, where would homeless services fall in? Is that scattered throughout sort of general government or public safety? It's one of the pie charts. I think it was the second pie chart.
So on the second pie chart, Susan Helsley for the record, and Madam Mayor, through you.
Yes.
Let me find my second part. By function, part of that would be in public safety, and part of it is actually within general. I'm trying to think where. I will get back to you to find out where neighborhood services lives because they have a very large portion of that. So I'll get back to you.
I was going to ask if we might please.
Kathy,
you have the function. Lucky for us that she's here.
Good afternoon, Kathy Thomas, Director for Neighborhood Services, but this week acting Chief of Community Services. It would be showing up in both of those categories. So things like more team, et cetera, are treated as public safety. But because Neighborhood Services does things other than homelessness, that portion of that department's budget would appear in government services.
And nothing with public works. I'm thinking of sanitation. Is a little tiny piece of the budget in public works.
Yes, Mayor. Again, Kathy Thomas for the record. those dollars aren't in my budget, and so I don't want to misspeak and say which category they would fall into. We do partner up in terms of sanitation, but I think that's general government, and I don't want to misspeak, so we'll follow up to be more accurate.
Thank you very much, Ms. Thomas.
So Susan Heltzley again, Director of Finance. So the sanitation dollars, some of those will actually be from our enterprise fund. And we also have some special revenue funds that contribute to this. So it's not all general fund dollars that are flowing through here. So we have a variety of funding sources that go towards our homeless.
Okay. And probably I could really be annoying and saying if you have anything allocated to technology and maybe even a little piece of that's homeless technology in your division there. So everything sort of connects with everything except for the bigger chunks. So any other question there? Okay, let's go this way. Yes, Councilman, Mayor Pro Tem, go, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to say I get excited about this because it's like the most important thing we do as a city council is approve the budget. So it's just exciting to see that the budget you put together, I think, is very reflective of the council priorities. And we've had many iterations over the last couple of months talking about the things that are important to us as individual council members and as a whole council. And I think your teams have done a really great job being responsive and respectful of the role that this council has played. So really grateful for everyone who put their time and energy into it, and for all the directors that are sitting out there. Thank you.
Okay, so this is public hearing, and now please, if there's anyone in the public that wishes to come forward and ask or make comment. When perfection exists, what can you do? So I'm going to close public hearing, and I will entertain a motion, Mayor Pro Tem, on agenda item 4.
Madam Mayor, I would move to approve the final budget as presented.
Thank you very much. There's a motion on agenda item 4. Please vote. And please post. And that passes. And now, if I might, on to agenda item 5, please, Mayor Pro Tem.
Madam Mayor, I move to approve the final redevelopment agency budget as presented.
Thank you. There's a motion on the redevelopment agency budget for 2024. Please vote and please post, and that does it. And so, gentlemen and Madam.
There's one more, Mayor. There's one more item, item 6.
There's a 6?
Jeff Dork, Gary already covered it, Mayor. You can just read the item in and go for a motion.
I can't see any item. Oh.
It's on the screen. It's on the screen.
Oh. Public hearing and discussion possible action regarding fiscal year 2024 City of Las Vegas.
No, we did that one.
It's item 5, item 6.
This one down here. Discussion for possible action regarding a resolution adopting the budget policies upon which the redevelopment agency budgets are based. Whoopee, is there a motion, please? That was
I will move to
so.
approve.
Thank you. All in favor, please signify by voting and posting. Get it both ways. Wonderful. Now may I use this?
Thank you.
We are
Thank you, Mayor and
adjourned. Thank
Council.
you
We
very
did need
much.
citizens' participation.
No, we can't. I undo it. It's undone. Now we're back to our final citizen participation. Are there any citizens here? Public comment during this portion of the agenda must be limited to matters within the jurisdiction of the City Council and Redevelopment Agency. No subject may be acted upon by the City Council or the Redevelopment Agency unless that subject is on the agenda and scheduled for action. If you wish to be heard, please come to the podium, give your name for the record. The amount of discussion on any single subject, as well as the amount of time any single speaker is allowed, may be limited. Is there anyone who would, yes, wonderful, who would like to speak under this portion of the agenda? And
They're
your name?
asking for Spanish translation.
Yes, please.
Interpretation, Madam
We
Mayor.
have 2 people, one who's a little more fluent than the other one, and there may be others who are somewhat fluent.
Entonces, si
but
puede decirnos su nombre para establecerlo en el récord y ya después, nada más recuerde que necesitan proveerme tiempo para entonces decirles lo que están comunicando, entonces traten de darme una pausa para entonces decirles lo que están comentando.
Patricia Lose.
Okay, Patricia Lose.
That's her name.
And yes, Patricia Lose, and with her is?
Arcelia, if you want to step and do the interpreting, we take your, that way it's coming down from there instead of here.
And
Thank
let's
you.
have the name of the lady accompanying Patricia.
La otra,
Patricia Lose.
Patricia Loza.
Astrid Torres.
Patricia Loza and Astrid Torres.
Okay.
Sí.
¿Qué es lo que están así?
Venimos porque la seguridad de Fremont está agrediéndonos. Ella trabaja allá en Fremont, nos agreden, abusan de su autoridad, son muy agresivos.
Okay. They're here because the Fremont security, they feel that they are being overly aggressive, and they work on Fremont.
Sí. Esta persona
This gentleman here. Do you want to share? Put him here, okay.
abusa de su condición de vigilante.
Abuses his authority as a vigilant.
Es agresivo.
He's aggressive.
Y tomamos al Marshall, lo denunciamos con Marshall y Marshall no hizo nada.
They accuse them to the marshals, and the marshals don't do anything about it.
No tomó ninguna. Este señor tiene negocios ilícitos con los círculos de Fremont.
This gentleman has illicit businesses with circles of people at Fremont Street.
Tiene esta señora
With this
vendiendo
lady
círculos.
here selling things for him.
Vende los círculos y busca homeless para
They
apartarlo y
sell-
venderlo a los trabajadores $80.
¿Qué venden?
Los círculos, que eso es
Okay, they sell
ilícito.
the location spots,
Tiene-
and
él especialmente tiene negocios ilícitos con los círculos de Fremont.
so they charge the homeless, and they have illicit business in charging the homeless for the locations at
$80
Fremont.
sale cada
Como nosotros no le compramos, toma represalia. A mí me mandó a
Because they don't
agredir,
pay
yo tengo
him
videos de todo.
for it, he takes repercussions against them for it. ¿Qué fue lo último que dijo?
Como
Arcelia,
no
did you mention she has
compramos círculos,
videos?
me mandó a agredir con una muchacha grandota. Ella me
So he sent somebody to intimidate her.
tengo videos de todo,
She has videos of everything.
donde resulté lesionada por él, que después el seguridad me agarró duro de las manos y me esposó hacia
The
atrás.
security held her by her arm, and she has an injury, and the esposa,
Sí,
and she was handcuffed,
donde resulté lesionada.
and she has a lesion from that.
Coloqué una denuncia con marcha levantando cargos y el domingo cuando llegó a Fremont,
She
los
filed a
marchas no
complaint
hicieron
with
nada, no
marshals.
levantaron cargos.
And Sunday, ¿usted llegó al Fremont? El domingo, when she arrived to Fremont on Sunday, nothing had happened.
Cristiano, aquí está donde estoy lesionada, tengo que estar hoy en el...
This is the information
El
regarding
video.
her injury.
And could I ask, was this the city marshal, Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, or the private security of FSC? Would you happen to
¿Este
know?
fue el marshal de la ciudad o del departamento de policía o de la seguridad privada del Fremont?
No, el que nos agrede es seguridad de Fremont y yo levanté cargos con los marchas.
Okay, so Fremont Street security are the ones that are attacking them,
Okay.
or
And has any report been filed with the Fremont Street Experience executive body there?
has hecho un reporte con el
Because I'm not sure this
de
is
ejecutivos de
germane
Fremont Street
yet
sobre
to
la
us.
seguridad.
Sí, pero no hacen nada. Sí,
Yes, and she
Okay,
says they don't do
I'll tell you what,
anything.
I think because we understand, and I'm sorry for all of this, for what we can do, but I'm going to ask our city attorney, Brian Scott, to get the information from you. This is Mr. Scott, and it is because we have different, ma'am, we have different organizations of security, and so to paint a brush on all of them is We have to find out the facts, and so
Mayor, I'll meet with
you'll be the
City Attorney Brian
yes,
Scott for the record. I'll meet with the mayor.
Fine.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then can you just let us know by a brief statement that, in fact, this is where it belongs?
Yes, I can let you know. I can let you know. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Hope you are okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And you may want to help. Do you need our interpreter, Mr. Scott? You're okay? Okay. Well, we have one too. Okay. Anyone else? Okay. This time, now I can say we are adjourned. Thank you all.